Upon hearing his alarm, Alejandro promptly rose from bed and made his way to the bathroom, avoiding any dawdling, a habit ingrained from his years in law enforcement. Swiftly, he refreshed himself, donned his uniform, and departed, forgoing breakfast save for a quick coffee and pastry from the nearby 24-hour supermarket. As he hastened down Sleepy Street, Alejandro's distaste for the city he patrolled lingered. Indeed, his weariness with urban life had become a constant companion, each city merging into a monotonous expanse of gray buildings in his mind. Amidst the skyscrapers and uniform storefronts, Alejandro had traversed a dozen cities over the past 15 years, yet none had left an impression on his heart. His life unfolded in a repetitive cycle, mundane paperwork, interrogations of forgettable faces, and a lack of genuine connections beyond mere acquaintances. Evenings found him in the familiar embrace of a nearby bar, where the nostalgic tunes of a retro band briefly diverted his thoughts from life's harsh realities. There, memories of his childhood, family, and lost friendships flooded his mind, prompting introspective questions about the fading vibrancy of existence and the specter of eternal solitude. Inevitably, thoughts of Mercedes, the sole woman he had loved, haunted Alejandro, bitterness seeping into his weary heart as he remembered their lost connection, for which he held himself responsible. Settling the bill at the bar with generous tips, he retreated home, burdened by memories and regret. The morning draped in mist and grayness, he hurried through the unfamiliar streets of yet another city, feeling the chill of perpetual estrangement gnawing at his soul. Approaching the supermarket, he hesitated momentarily, resisting the urge to forego sustenance, yet the warm glow of the interior beckoned him forward. As he entered, Alejandro instinctively navigated towards his preferred pastries, his attention caught by a young man near the chocolate bars whose demeanor stirred a faint sense of recognition. Brief eye contact was swiftly averted as the young man feigned interest in the products, triggering Alejandro's seasoned instincts. Something was amiss. As the young man abruptly made for the exit, Alejandro's police training propelled him into pursuit, commanding the fleeing figure to halt. Amidst the startled gazes of cashiers, Alejandro gave chase, his resolve unyielding despite any bystander's perception. The policeman, certain of the kid's mischievous intent, swiftly caught up with him at the exit, roughly seizing him by the sleeve of his jacket. "Stop right there," Alejandro exclaimed. "I'll let you go after a search." The young man's complexion paled, his eyes catching the policeman's notice, their rare hazel green shade oddly reminiscent of his own. "I didn't take anything," the detainee stammered, unconvincingly. "If you didn't take anything, then prove it. Empty your pockets," Alejandro sternly demanded. Years of service had hardened his heart against deceit. The kid's words were like blades against armor. Though the kid allowed the search, in one pocket, the policeman found nothing but a hole, while in another, a stolen chocolate bar and a small black wallet lay hidden. "So, you said you didn't take anything, huh?" The policeman bitterly smirked. How many of these juvenile thieves had he encountered over the years, all appearing so innocent at first glance? He trusted no one anymore. The kid cast his gaze downward.
I'm sorry.
"I'll pay. Just please don't take me to the police station. My mom is very ill," pleaded the kid. The policeman shook his head. "Why didn't you think of that before walking out with a stolen chocolate bar in your pocket? Why the silence?" The kid slumped further. "I honestly don't have any money, and I'm very hungry. I do work, really, but it all goes to my mom's medicine," the kid explained. Alejandro skeptically eyed the kid. He did appear very thin, even emaciated. Perhaps, this time, he was telling the truth. However, that didn't excuse his actions. "And do you often steal chocolate bars?" he asked, and the guilty kid nodded, lowering his head. "Every day," he admitted. The policeman's face remained impassive as a mask. "You'll have to come with me to the station," Alejandro declared firmly. The kid looked up, tears filling his eyes. "No, please, my mom won't survive this. I've already said it all," he pleaded. "You'll have to answer for your actions," Alejandro reiterated. The kid nodded towards the wallet that the policeman still held in his hand. "Please give it back. There's no money in there anyway," he pleaded. But Alejandro slipped the wallet into the pocket of his uniform. I'll check its contents at the station, he stated, leading the kid out of the supermarket. The police station was only a couple of blocks away, and Alejandro briskly walked along the sidewalk, never taking his eyes off the boy, who could barely keep up. Looks like he really doesn't eat enough, flashed through the man's mind. At the station, he immediately took the thief to his office. So, your mother is sick, you work, and you have no money for food, Alejandro remarked, pulling out the black wallet from his pocket. The kid only nodded silently. Let's see what's in here, Alejandro said, opening the wallet and peering inside. Several small coins, a shiny pebble, and a folded piece of yellowed paper. That's all that was there. It seems the guy wasn't lying, Alejandro thought, but his usual suspicion kept nagging at him. Placing the wallet on the table, he took out a scrap of paper and was about to unfold it when suddenly, the young man jumped up as if stung. Oh no, please not that. It means a lot to me. It's a memory of, he mumbled hesitantly, but Alejandro shot him a stern look, unfolded the paper, and his man continued, I'm Danny, and these are my friends. We're just enjoying the evening, officer. Alejandro felt a surge of irritation but kept his composure. Well, enjoying the evening doesn't involve breaking the law, he retorted. Danny smirked, taking a swig from his bottle. Relax, officer. We're not hurting anyone, he said casually. Alejandro's grip on his baton tightened. I'm giving you a warning this time, but if I catch you here again with alcohol, there will be consequences, he warned sternly. The group exchanged glances, and Danny shrugged. Sure thing, officer. We'll be on our way, he said, leading his friends away with an air of nonchalance. Alejandro watched them go, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. He knew this wouldn't be the last time he encountered troublemakers like them. As he continued his patrol, he couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. Little did he know that his encounter with Danny and his friends would be the start of a series of events that would test his resolve as a police officer and challenge everything he thought he knew about justice and duty. That woman retorted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I suppose you expect me to curtsy, Your Highness? Alejandro raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by her defiance. Respect for the law doesn't discriminate based on surnames, he replied evenly. Mercedes scoffed, flicking her cigarette ash onto the ground. And who said I had any respect for the law? She shot back, her gaze challenging. Alejandro's expression hardened. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, he reminded her firmly. I suggest you and your friends move along before I have to take further action. Mercedes rolled her eyes, but there was a hint of amusement in her demeanor. Fine, we'll go, she said, gesturing for her companions to follow her. But don't think this is over, Officer Alvarez. We'll meet again. With that, they sauntered off into the night, leaving Alejandro to ponder the encounter. He knew he hadn't seen the last of Mercedes and her friends, but for now, he had other matters to attend to. As he resumed his patrol, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger conflict between law and defiance. The policeman heard the voice of the red-haired guy, clearly displeased with how Alejandro spoke about his girlfriend. However, Alejandro didn't look around. His gaze remained fixed on Mercedes's eyes, which were now shooting angry sparks. To the young man, it felt like he was about to drown in the depths of those eyes. And you're not my daddy to tell me how to behave, Mercedes gritted through her teeth, throwing away her cigarette. Proudly lifting her head, she turned away from Alejandro. Let's go, guys. There's too much morality here, she declared, grabbing her backpack and striding along the promenade without waiting for anyone. The others reluctantly followed her, and the red-haired guy gave Alejandro a grim look as a parting shot but said nothing. The young policeman clenched his teeth, but soon his attention shifted back to the girl. He watched her departing figure for a long time. The next encounter took place on the road. Alejandro was crossing the street at a pedestrian crossing when suddenly, a red motorcycle came speeding around the corner, barely managing to brake in front of him. Alejandro, in uniform, raised his eyebrows sternly, expecting an explanation. The motorcycle driver removed his helmet, and the young man breathed out in surprise. Before him stood Mercedes Castro, her leather jumpsuit with long sleeves tightly hugging her slender figure, and this time, her hair was dyed a venomous green color. Mercedes's eyes looked bold and mocking. "Oh, familiar general. Why are you moving like a tortoise?" she laughed. Alejandro choked on her unexpected audacity and didn't immediately find a response. Meanwhile, Mercedes put her helmet back on and revved the engine. The next time the young policeman encountered her was in the supermarket. Alejandro didn't immediately recognize the girl. Mercedes was standing at the fruit stand, picking out the most beautiful apples. She wore a light blue cardigan and a white floral dress, and this time, her hair was dyed turquoise. Alejandro wanted to walk past, but his legs carried him toward the girl. "Mercedes Castro with an unexpected encounter," he said ironically. "Today not in leather and not on a motorcycle." Surprised, taken aback, the girl shuddered and dropped an apple from her hands. It rolled across the floor. Alejandro leaned down and picked it up. "Were you following me?" Mercedes asked, squinting, quickly regaining her composure and once again assuming the guise of a playful and audacious girl. "No, just came in here for coffee by chance," Alejandro replied. Mercedes looked at him, tilting her head slightly. "And you seem to be an apple enthusiast," Alejandro smiled. Mercedes looked somewhat puzzled into the basket, which already contained several apples, and unexpectedly burst into tears in front of the young man. "This isn't for me," she managed to say through her tears. Alejandro felt embarrassed and blushed. He had unwittingly upset the girl. "For whom?" he cautiously asked. The girl wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "For my grandmother. She's sick and hospitalized. I'm going to visit her." Alejandro felt even more ashamed. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "It's okay," Mercedes replied, taking a small mirror out of her purse. She looked. Anxiously, Alejandro blurted out, "You look great." Immediately, he regretted his words as Mercedes gave him a sly look. "Are you already giving me compliments?" she asked flirtatiously. Alejandro felt himself blushing once again. "Just stating a fact," he casually replied. Mercedes nodded, clearly not believing him. "Do you want me to accompany you to the hospital?" Alejandro unexpectedly asked himself. It seemed that the girl was also a bit taken aback, but the invitation clearly evoked pleasant feelings in her. "Are you afraid I'll be kidnapped on the way?" she smiled. "That too," Alejandro replied seriously. They paid for the apples and left the supermarket. The early evening was warm with a gentle floral scent in the air, blending with the salty sea breeze, making the inhalation of this cocktail more than pleasant. The hospital was only a few blocks away from the supermarket, and Alejandro suddenly found himself wishing the road to it would never end. He couldn't recall what they talked about, but Mercedes laughed a lot, although her eyes still remained sad. The young couple stopped at the entrance of the hospital, and the girl thanked Alejandro. "Can I get your phone number?" the boy asked, terribly afraid she might refuse. But Mercedes just nodded in response. On the way back, Alejandro unconsciously felt wings behind his back. He called her the next day and asked about her grandmother's health. "She's a bit better," Mercedes replied. "I've already visited her today." "Do you love her very much?" Alejandro asked. "Yes," the girl confessed. "She's my kindred spirit, the only person who understands me like no one else in this world." Alejandro suggested meeting up and taking a walk along the promenade, and the girl agreed. They wandered along the sea for a long time, sat on a wooden pier, and skipped pebbles into the water. Then it became completely dark, and the stars lit up in the sky. Alejandro knew a bit about constellations from his childhood. His grandfather told him stories about the Big and Little Dippers, about Orion and Cassiopeia, about the hair of Berenice and Andromeda. The young man told Mercedes some of them. The girl listened very attentively and tried to find these constellations in the sky. "You know so much. It's very interesting with you," she admitted. "Shall we meet on the weekend?" Alejandro took her hand and shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I'm going home for the weekend." Mercedes nodded understandingly. Alejandro thought for a moment, and an idea came to his mind. However, summoning the courage to say it out loud was quite difficult. "But if you want, I can take you with me," the boy finally exhaled. Mercedes looked at him in astonishment. "Do you want to introduce me to your parents?" she asked. "Why not? They're quite fun people." "And you'll see my home," Alejandro said, his heart pounding. Mercedes silently pondered the offer for a few moments. "Okay," she said, "just tell me, what's your parents' favorite color?" "Why do you ask?"
Alejandro wondered.
"I'll dye my hair," Mercedes explained, and the young man smiled in return. He felt surprisingly good. The trip couldn't have gone better. Mercedes appeared at the bus stop in a simple blue dress with small polka dots. Her hair was a natural dark reddish hue, and on her nose, Alejandro no longer saw a piercing. He realized it was only an imitation. They sat side by side in the front seat, and part of the way, Mercedes dozed off on the young man's shoulder. When they arrived, Alejandro's parents met them at the bus station. Alejandro introduced them to Mercedes, and by the joyful expressions on their faces, he could tell that they really liked the girl. Everything was perfect: delicious home-cooked food, relaxation in the shady garden, a stroll through the nearby fields together with Mercedes, where they lay side by side for a long time, inhaling the honey scent of flowers. The girl made wreaths for herself and Alejandro, and the lovers resembled two carefree and joyous children. Overwhelmed by emotions, at some point, Alejandro felt that poetry was pouring out of him. He pulled out a scrap of paper from his bag and an unknown pencil stub from somewhere and wrote them down. Then he discreetly tucked the note into the pocket of Mercedes' sleeping dress. 20-some years had passed since then, and right now, Alejandro, standing in front of the young thief in his office, held that very scrap of paper in his hands. "Please return it," the boy pleaded tearfully. "This note belongs to my mother." Alejandro looked at the boy with sightless eyes. "Your mother?" "Yes," he echoed. "So, will you give me the note back or not?" The boy confirmed. Alejandro carefully rolled up the scrap of paper, put it back into the wallet, and handed it to the boy, who promptly tucked it into his pocket. For a while, the policeman remained pensive. "And what's your mother's name?" he asked hesitantly at last. "Mercedes," the boy replied softly.
Mercedes, Alejandro repeated softly.
There was a long silence. The boy looked at the policeman bewilderedly, as if the sudden change in him took him by surprise. There was no trace of his previous confidence and assertiveness. "So, you say she's sick," Alejandro whispered. The boy nodded. "She's been in the hospital for several months already," he murmured quietly, avoiding eye contact. Alejandro felt his legs weaken. He pulled a chair towards himself and sat down. "And how long have you been living in this city?" the man asked. "Since I was born, if I'm not mistaken," the boy answered, raising his gaze to the policeman. Alejandro sighed heavily. Then he stood up and paced around the room as if pondering something. "Listen, what's your name at least?" he asked the boy. He replied, "It's short, but my full name is Alejandro." The policeman looked shocked at the boy. That's why he seemed so familiar. The same eyes, the same hair. Ale was simply a copy of himself in his youth. Alejandro's head spun. What he realized just didn't make sense to him. How could this even be possible? Could this young thief be his son? Memories carried Alejandro back 20 years when they returned from the young man's hometown with Mercedes. He took up his post the same evening. The streets of the city were relatively calm. A couple of rowdy youths were trying to prove something to each other, and that was all. But when Alejandro walked out onto the promenade and reached the very spot where he first saw Mercedes, he noticed her former company there. The guys were again sipping cocktails and talking loudly among themselves. The tall red-haired guy spotted the policeman from afar. "Ah, our dear Alvarez has arrived," he shouted. The whole group gathered and moved closer to the leader. Alejandro sensed trouble but didn't show it. They wouldn't attack a law enforcement officer, he thought. He approached closer and, as before, reminded them that drinking alcoholic beverages on the promenade was prohibited. "So what will you do if we continue to do it?" "Huh, hero?" the redhead asked insolently. The others surrounded Alejandro in a tight circle. "I'll have to take you to the police station," the young man said calmly. The redhead menacingly rolled up the sleeves of his black sweatshirt, revealing a tattoo depicting a sword and a snake. "Feeling brave, huh?" he sneered through his teeth. Alejandro held his gaze. "I wouldn't advise you to attack a police officer," he warned calmly. "The consequences won't be pleasant." The redhead spat at his feet. "And I wouldn't advise you to hang around Mercedes," he replied roughly. She's not for you. We won't let you off. Consider yourself warned. With these words, the tall guy nodded grimly at the policeman and, pushing one of his own, walked away. The rest, like loyal subjects, followed him. Alejandro watched them for a while. What bastards, he muttered. He needed to warn Mercedes to be more careful. Alvarez patrolled the streets all night, and when he returned to the police station, an unexpected piece of news awaited him. Alejandro was being transferred to another city. This news shocked the young man. He didn't want to go so far from home and leave his beloved, but orders were orders. Alejandro pulled himself together and called Mercedes to tell her everything. Hearing the sad news, the girl burst into tears. They met half an hour later at her house. Seeing her beloved, the girl cried even harder. Alejandro hugged her tightly, stroking her hair for a long time, trying to comfort her, but she was inconsolable. Perhaps it's for the best, Alejandro, he mused, recalling the threats from his former friends towards Mercedes. What do you mean? The girl asked, wiping away her tears. Alejandro told her about the conversation that had taken place on the waterfront. Don't pay attention to them, Mercedes waved it off. I've known them all since childhood. Dogs bark, but they don't bite, Alejandro sighed. I just want you to be happy. I'm not sure if being with me will be good for you. A life of constant travel. Mercedes looked into his eyes and said seriously, I'm ready. Alejandro was momentarily stunned. What? Mercedes repeated seriously. That I'm ready to go with you to the ends of the earth. The young man looked at her in amazement. What about your family? Your grandmother? Mercedes shook her head decisively. I'll visit her very often. Alejandro couldn't believe his ears. But that means we should get married, he said. My family is very traditional, and that's how I was raised. Mercedes smiled happily. So, I'll become your wife, if of course you agree. Alejandro nodded, hardly believing his luck. Yes, I agree, exclaimed Mercedes. Hearing these words, Alejandro lifted her up and spun her around. The wedding was very modest. Only the closest relatives from both sides were present. Immediately after the ceremony, the newlyweds set off on their journey into their new life. The unfamiliar town where they were going to settle welcomed them with sunshine. A good sign, thought Alejandro. He was very happy. His beloved wife was by his side, he was promised a promotion at work, and they were given a small but nice apartment. What more could he ask for? At first, everything was wonderful. Mercedes enjoyed living in the new town, happily arranging the apartment, bringing warmth and coziness to it. She started attending meetings of young wives held at the local club, made new friends, and didn't feel bored or lonely when Alejandro was at work. They spent weekends together, sometimes staying at home, sometimes going somewhere or watching movies. Life seemed wonderful and beautiful. However, gradually, something imperceptibly changed. Alejandro spent more and more time at work. His new position required him to meet more demands. Moreover, a secret criminal group appeared in the city, causing panic and constant disruptions to the lives of ordinary citizens. Alejandro became nervous, slept and ate poorly, constantly looked grim and focused. He saw crime everywhere and was very afraid for Mercedes' life, reacting sharply to any glance when they went out together. Eventually, they stopped doing that, and Alejandro forbade his wife to go out alone. Mercedes, accustomed to complete freedom, found these changes very difficult. She became pale, and one day, Alejandro heard her vomiting in the bathroom. However, he was in a hurry to work and didn't ask about anything. In the evening, a real storm broke out. Alejandro returned late. He had spent the whole day on his feet and hadn't eaten anything. The only thing he dreamed of was coming home and collapsing on the bed fully dressed. However, Mercedes met him at the threshold. Why did it take you so long? She asked. It was clear that the girl was on edge. Darling, you know I have a lot of work. I'm very tired, Alejandro replied. And what about me? Did you ever think about me? Didn't you think about what it's like for me to sit at home all day, waiting for you to come back? Mercedes suddenly burst out. You can invite a friend over, Alejandro suggested. He walked into the room and sat on the bed, still fully clothed. I didn't come here for that, Mercedes continued to shout. I came here to be with you, but you're never here." With these words, she started to cry. Alejandro wanted to get up and hug her, to comfort her, but he had no strength left.
Come.
"Here, my love," he quietly called out. "No, I won't," Mercedes stubbornly replied, then suddenly exclaimed, "I don't want to see you at all. I regret ever meeting you." These final words from his wife pierced Alejandro's heart painfully. He erupted with anger, jumped off the bed, and rushed towards Mercedes. "Do you think I like this life?" he erupted. "Do you think I dreamed of this?" She cried again. "You chose it yourself, and you always only thought about yourself. You're selfish. You don't know anything around you," the girl exclaimed with bitterness. And then Alejandro couldn't hold it anymore. He made the biggest mistake of his life. Instead of embracing and comforting his wife, he unconsciously raised his hand to strike her. Mercedes looked at him with wide eyes. Then she quickly shook her head, as if fighting against a vision. The tears in her eyes dried up instantly, replaced by fear in her gaze. "You won't do it," she said calmly. Alejandro burst into loud sobs, lowering his hand. He covered his face with his hands and cried, "Forgive me, my love. I don't know what came over me." Mercedes remained silent for a long time. Then she went to the bathroom and locked herself in. Alejandro, overwhelmed with sorrow and shame, lay down on the bed and fell asleep. He woke up in the morning. The bed was unmade. Mercedes was not there. Alejandro struggled to get up and staggered into the bathroom. There was nobody there either. There was a note on the kitchen table. "Forgive me, but you won't see me again," Mercedes had written to him. Alejandro rushed to the closet and threw open the doors. His wife's clothes and her suitcase were gone. He leaned against the wall and slid to the floor. "Have I lost her?" a thought flashed in his mind. Realizing this, Alejandro jumped up as if stung and rushed out of the house. He ran not caring where he was going until he reached a small old cottage where Mercedes's best friend, Laura, lived. Alejandro started banging on the door with all his might. After a couple of minutes, it swung open, and Laura's husband, Diego, appeared at the threshold, looking alarmed. "Alejandro, what's wrong? You look terrible," he exclaimed. "Mercedes," Alejandro panted. "Is she here? Don't think about hiding her." But Diego just shrugged. Sleepy Laura appeared behind him. Seeing the young policeman, she became worried. "Alejandro, what's wrong with Mercedes?" she quickly asked. "No, I don't know," he replied bewilderedly. "She's gone. I thought she was here." Tears reddened in the man's eyes. "We had a fight yesterday," he confessed. "I was very tired and fell asleep, and in the morning, she was nowhere to be found." Having said this, Alejandro couldn't hold back and started to cry. "She wasn't herself, blaming me for locking her in four walls, but I was just concerned about her safety." "Wait, Alejandro, why are we standing here?" Laura's husband intervened. "Come inside and tell us everything calmly." But the policeman just shook his head. "No, if she's really not here, I have to find her. I'm guilty before her, and I'm terrified of losing her." Alejandro attempted to break free, but Diego managed to grab him by the sleeve. "Stop, we're not letting you go in this state. You might do something foolish or, God forbid, get hit by a car. Come inside and calm down," Diego insisted. Alejandro gave in. He allowed Laura to lead him to the kitchen and sit him down at the table. The young woman immediately rushed to brew herbal tea to somehow help her best friend's husband calm down. Diego entered the room. He changed into a t-shirt and jeans, replacing his casual clothes. "All right, here's the plan," he said briskly. "Drink some tea. It won't hurt to calm down a bit. Then we'll take my car and go search for Mercedes." Alejandro just nodded. Laura placed a cup of tea in front of him, and he took a few sips, burning his tongue. "All right, we're off," he exclaimed, jumping up from the table. "Thanks for the tea, Laura." He and Diego quickly left the house and got into the car. Alejandro remembered that Mercedes had two other good friends, so they went to search for the police officer's wife at their places. However, neither of them knew anything about the girl. "I haven't seen Mercedes in so long. She's always at home," said one of the friends. The other just shrugged. It was evident that both were telling the truth. Alejandro was becoming desperate. Where else could she have gone? He exclaimed. Diego thought hard. You know what, buddy, he finally said. Let's go to the train station. He started the engine, and they set off. At the station, the men approached the ticket counter and, seeing the familiar cashier, old Hugo, who had been working there since time immemorial and knew all the townsfolk by face, they turned to him hopefully. Mercedes? Yes, she bought a ticket early in the morning but asked not to tell anyone, he calmly replied and kindly added, So, have you two had a falling out?
Alejandro grimly nodded.
Well, no worries, young and foolish, reassured old Hugo. Make up, she'll be back like a little lamb. But Alejandro didn't share his confidence. Please, Hugo, tell us where she went. Where else? Home, of course, he simply replied. Apparently, she missed her family. Alejandro immediately bought a ticket and the next morning knocked on Mercedes' parents' door. They opened it and were terribly surprised to see Alejandro on the doorstep. And when he told them the reason for his sudden appearance, Mercedes' mother clutched her heart. It turned out that the girl hadn't been home. Alejandro visited all of Mercedes' old friends, even the red-haired one, but no one had seen his wife. He couldn't catch her trail. Are you going to arrest me? Alejandro snapped back to reality at the boy's voice. The policeman startled and looked at the young man, noting his resemblance to himself once again. Hold on, you have time for prison. Alejandro bitterly smiled. Can I visit your mom? Alejandro's face elongated in surprise. You can, but why would you? He asked. Alejandro nodded quickly, making a snap decision. Then let's go, he said, questions later. Alejandro headed for the exit, and the policeman, grabbing the keys to the patrol car from the table, followed him. In the hospital, they approached the registration desk together. Hello, I'm here for Mom, said Alejandro to the administrator, a woman in her 50s with a kind but slightly tired face. And who's this with you? She exclaimed in surprise. Your relative? You look so alike. Al glanced at the policeman. Well, actually, he began, but Alejandro didn't let him finish. Yes, a relative, he firmly answered. I'm his father, Al coughed, but the administrator didn't pay attention to it. How wonderful that you've come. Now Al will feel better, and Mercedes will probably be delighted too, she said warmly. I hope so, Alejandro said, his heart pounding. They walked to the elevators and went up to the third floor. Is Mom seriously ill? Alejandro asked A, who had been staring at him all this time but hadn't asked any questions. Yes, the boy noted in response, and the policeman sighed heavily. Finally, they reached the right ward and stopped in front of the door. Are you sure Mom won't get worse when she sees you? Alejandro asked quietly. I hope not, Alejandro repeated. If you upset or hurt her, you will regret it, the boy said firmly. The police officer nervously nodded in response. Al opened the door and entered the room first, the man following him, feeling trembling inside. It seemed to him that his heartbeat could be heard throughout the room. He recognized Mercedes immediately, despite the passing years, and she looked very pale and exhausted from illness. The woman looked up at him, and silent tears rolled down her cheeks. Mom, Al whispered, taking her hand. Mercedes, Alejandro murmured, stopping in the middle of the room, hesitant to approach the woman. Al, please stay in the corridor for a bit. We need to talk, she said. Is he really my father? Al couldn't help but ask, and Mercedes simply nodded in response. Al walked out, glancing back at Alejandro, his face reflecting a mixture of emotions. When the boy closed the door behind him, Alejandro rushed to Mercedes, fell to his knees beside the bed, and buried his face in her blanket. It seemed to him that she was so fragile and almost transparent beneath him. Forgive me, my love. Please forgive, he muttered hoarsely, as if none of these 20 years had passed, as if they had argued just yesterday. It's me who should ask for forgiveness, darling, Mercedes whispered. I was already pregnant with Al back then and couldn't control my emotions. I realized it later, but it was too late. But why, my love? I wish I'd waited for you all this time. I remained alone. Mercedes looked at him incredulously. At first, I convinced myself that I should forget you. I was always so proud. But when Al was born, everything changed. I realized it wouldn't be fair to keep him hidden from you, so I went back to our town. But you were no longer there. They transferred me, Alejandro whispered. The police gave me your new address, and I went to you. When I approached the house with Al in my arms, I saw you with another woman. Mercedes barely uttered the last words, as if it was difficult for her. Alejandro was stunned. But I don't know who you're talking about, he said. She had long black hair down to her waist and tan skin. Such a beauty. And you seemed so happy with her, Mercedes whispered. Alejandro paused for a moment. Oh, that was my neighbor, Anna. Sometimes she asked me to help her with nails or hang curtains. Maybe she was in love with me, but I couldn't think of anyone else but you, my dear. With these words, Alejandro gently took Mercedes's hand. I searched for you, I swear. Searched for you for a long time, but you disappeared as if you never existed. Sometimes I thought I had gone mad and just invented you. Once again, Mercedes cried. How foolish I've been, she exclaimed. Don't blame yourself. That's all in the past now. I'll always be by your side. I swear to you, my love. Alejandro fervently declared. I don't know how much time I have left, Mercedes murmured through her tears. Is it that serious? The man grew concerned. Al didn't tell me the reasons for your illness. What do the doctors say? Mercedes wiped her tears and looked at Alejandro. They say the course of the illness depends on my will to live. I didn't have it. My life has long turned into a series of monotonous, empty days. Alejandro pressed Mercedes's hand to his cheek. Her words struck a chord in his heart, and their meaning was all too familiar to him. I'll be by your side. Perhaps it will brighten your life even a little, he said. Thank you, my love, Mercedes simply replied. Al entered the room. May I? He asked. Mercedes nodded. Al entered and sat on a chair opposite the bed, his demeanor showing he was awaiting explanations. Alejandro stood up, kissed Mercedes's hand, and approached his son. You said my father died, Al said softly, but there was reproach in his words. Yes, son, Mercedes replied. The thing is, your father and I had a misunderstanding at one point. Upon hearing the word misunderstanding, Alejandro bitterly smiled. And we parted ways for many years, Mercedes finished. Al looked at his father with suspicion. He abandoned us, the young man clarified. Mercedes shook her head. No, son, he didn't. He didn't even know about your existence. Al looked incredulously at his mother. Well, actually, she confessed quietly, it's my fault, in everything. Both of us, Alejandro interjected. But now, everything will be different. However, Al still frowned. But just this morning, you practically dragged me to the police station, he grumbled. Mercedes clutched her heart. What? Oh, and I didn't even ask how you two met and how Alejandro ended up here. I was so upset. Alejandro sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand again. Calm down, Mercedes. Al is not in danger. It was a mistake. With these words, he looked meaningfully at his son. Al crossed his arms with a proud look. All like mother, the policeman thought contentedly. Well, it's okay. We'll make friends yet. Alejandro arranged with an acquaintance to take Al to work in his business and teach him everything. Now, thefts from supermarkets were over for good. Every day, Alejandro visited his beloved wife in the hospital. What a beautiful ending. It's heartwarming to see Mercedes's health improving with Alejandro's love and support. Their simple yet meaningful moments together, like the picnic in the field, reflect the depth of their bond. It's a testament to the power of love to heal and bring joy back into someone's life. Thank you for sharing this touching story. If you enjoyed it, please show your support by liking the video and leaving a comment. Your feedback means a lot. Thank you.